You wake to cold that has weight. It presses down on your chest like a hand. Your breath hangs in the air above your face, a small gray cloud in the dark. Outside the shelter, the wind is doing something you have no word for yet, a low and endless scream across a world of ice. This is not a bad night. This is just a night. For tens of thousands of years, this was the planet your ancestors were handed. Not the warm, green Earth you know. A frozen one. Welcome to the Ice Age. And the strange truth is that you are here, breathing, reading this, only because they figured out how to live inside it. So how did they do it? How does a fragile, hairless tropical animal, an ape built for the African sun, survive a world buried under glaciers? Let's start with the world itself. The period you're picturing has a name. Scientists call the coldest stretch of it the last glacial maximum. Decode that simply, and it just means the point, around 20,000 years ago, when the ice reached its greatest size. Sheets of ice more than a mile thick sat on top of what is now Chicago and Stockholm and Manchester. So much of the planet's water was frozen solid that the sea level dropped by more than 100 meters, and you could have walked from Siberia to Alaska without ever getting your feet wet. Your ancestors did not live on the ice. They lived beside it. To the south of the great ice sheets stretched something that no longer exists anywhere on Earth. Researchers call it the Mammoth Steppe, a vast, dry, frozen grassland that wrapped around the top of the world, from Spain all the way to the Yukon. It was bitterly cold, but it was alive. Herds of woolly mammoth, woolly rhino, bison, wild horse, and reindeer moved across it in numbers that are almost impossible to picture today. This was the larder, and it was guarded by the cold. Now here is the question that really matters. There was already a kind of human living here when your ancestors arrived, and it was tougher than you. The Neanderthals had been in Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years before your kind walked in. Their bodies were built for the freeze. Shorter, broader, heavier, packed with more muscle, with a wide-barreled chest that held warmth far better than your long, lean, tropical frame. By every obvious measure, they were the cold weather specialists. You were the soft newcomer who should have frozen first. And yet you are the one still here. The Neanderthals are gone. Why? For a long time, people assumed the answer was simple. Your ancestors must have been smarter, or more violent, or just luckier. But the real answer is quieter than any of that, and it has been sitting in the archaeology the whole time. The answer is not in the body at all. It's in what the body was wearing. Think about how you survive the cold today. You don't grow fur. You put on a coat. Your ancestors made exactly the same discovery, but they had to invent it from nothing. And the breakthrough that saved them wasn't fire, and it wasn't caves, and it wasn't muscle. It was a thin sliver of bone with a single hole carved in one end. The sewing needle. A geneticist named David Reed once attacked this question from a very strange direction. Lice. Body lice, the kind that live not on bare skin but inside clothing, split off from ordinary head lice at some point deep in the human past. By tracking the genetic distance between the two, Reed's team estimated that humans began wearing fitted clothing somewhere on the order of 100,000 years ago, long before the worst of the cold ever arrived. The insects living in our clothes had quietly recorded the date we first started wearing clothes at all. But a loose hide thrown over your shoulders is not enough for a world this cold. To survive the Mammoth Steppe, you needed clothing that was tailored, sewn tight at the wrist, the ankle, and the neck, sealing a thin layer of warm air against your skin and refusing to let it go. And tailoring needs a needle. At a site in Russia called Sungir, around 34,000 years old, archaeologists uncovered the graves of an adult and 2 children. Their bodies were covered in thousands of tiny beads, each one carved by hand from mammoth ivory. And from the careful rows those beads still lay in, researchers could reconstruct the fitted sewn clothing they had once decorated. Caps, jackets, trousers, even something like fitted boots. These were not people shivering under a raw skin. These were people dressed for the weather. The researcher Ian Gilligan has spent years arguing this exact point. That complex tailored clothing was not a luxury or a decoration. It was the single technology that let modern humans push into the coldest places on the planet and stay there. The Neanderthals, the evidence suggests, mostly wore simpler wraps. Your ancestors learned to sew. A needle doesn't look like a weapon, but in the Ice Age, it may have been the most powerful tool you owned. So let's reconstruct a day. Let's put you inside one. It's the deep cold of midwinter on the steppe. You live in a structure that would stop a modern visitor dead in their tracks, because it is a dome built from the bones of mammoths. At a site in Ukraine called Mezhyrich, archaeologists found the remains of houses framed from dozens of mammoth jaws and curving tusks, arranged in careful, deliberate, interlocking patterns. Some of these single homes used the bones of more than 90 animals. Hides were stretched tight over the frame. A hearth burned at the center. You wake before the others. The fire has burned low, so you feed it, but not with wood, because out here there is barely a tree to be found. You burn bone instead. Mammoth bone, greasy and slow, throwing a steady heat into the dark. You pull on your clothing, an inner layer against the skin, fur turned inward, an outer layer, fur turned out, every seam sewn tight. You step outside, and the cold slams into you like a wall, and you are ready for it, because you are wearing a piece of technology that took 100,000 years to perfect. Today, the group will hunt. Not alone. Never alone. Out here, alone is just a slower way to die. And this is the second great secret of Ice Age survival, the one that is so easy to miss. Your ancestors did not outlast the cold as individuals. They outlasted it as a network. The archaeologist Olga Sofer, who studied the Gravettian peoples of Central Europe, revealed just how sophisticated these communities really were. They were firing clay. They were twisting plant fibers into cord and weaving it into basketry. They were organizing complicated, coordinated hunts. At Dolní Věstonice, a site in what is now the Czech Republic, people were firing small clay figurines in simple kilns more than 25,000 years ago, thousands of years before anyone on Earth fired a clay pot to cook in. They were experimenting. They were inventing. They were specialists. And above all, they were connected. Seashells from distant coastlines, lumps of amber and rare-colored stone all turn up hundreds of miles from where they began, passed hand to hand along long chains of relationship that stretched right across the frozen continent. When the local hunt failed, those distant ties became insurance. A single bad winter in your valley did not have to mean the end, not if you knew people 3 valleys over who would take you in. Could you build a web like that today, made of nothing but trust, with no phone and no map to hold it together? Your ancestors did. Their lives hung on it. Now here's the part that turns the whole story upside down. You probably imagine Ice Age survival as a brutal contest of toughness, where the strongest body simply wins. But the cold-adapted specialist, the powerful Neanderthal, is the one who vanished into the dark. And the animal that walked out the other side was the soft one. The one that could not grow a thicker coat, so it sewed one. The one that could not fight a mammoth on its own, so it learned never to be on its own. The one that could not outlast a famine through sheer strength, so it built a living web of friends across an entire frozen continent who would feed it when its own valley went silent. Your ancestors did not beat the Ice Age with their bodies. They beat it with needles, and with fire, and with each other. And that is the part of them you are still quietly carrying. You will almost certainly never feel real cold the way they did, the kind that can kill a grown adult in under an hour. But notice what your oldest instincts still do without being told. When winter comes, you layer up. When life turns hard, you reach for other people. When you hit a problem your bare body cannot solve, you reach for a tool. That is not some clever modern habit. That is a survival strategy more than 30,000 years old, still running quietly underneath everything you do, the very same one that carried a thin, shivering tropical ape all the way through a world of ice. So tonight, when you pull the blanket up against the cold and feel it settle over you with a little weight, remember what that weight really is. It is the oldest victory your kind ever won.